All right, good morning, CCV and Fireside Room. I'd like to ask you, if you would, to stand out of the respect for the reading of the Word of God. Can you do that? Stand together. I know you're going to be sitting down for a while, so here we go. I'm going to read the first two slides, and then I want you to read the next slide. So I'll read two verses, then you read one, I'll read another, and you read the last one. So here we go. The first two are mine. Genesis 1:1 says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." And then Romans 1:18 says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness." Now this is you on the count of three. 1, 2, 3. Because for since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen.
Being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse.
All right, you can be seated. As you're being seated, I want to remind you of the story that I've told you a couple of times about the guy who wakes up one morning and he says, "I'm dead." And his family says, "Well, you're not dead because you wouldn't be talking to us." But he insists on the fact, his fact, that he's dead. So for 2 weeks, he goes on and on. He goes to the office and tells all his coworkers, "I'm dead." And everybody says, "What, are you crazy?" And his family hoped this would end, but it doesn't. So after 2 weeks of him saying and walking around, "I'm dead," they said, "You're not dead." He said, "How do you know I'm not dead?" And they presented the evidence that only living people bleed. Only living people bleed. And so they presented all kind of data and information. And finally, after about 48 hours of this, he said, "Well, I guess you're right. Only living people bleed." And immediately one of the family members took out a knife and stabbed him in the arm. And blood began to spew out. And you know what he said? "Great Scott, I guess dead people bleed too." Now, here's the reason I tell you that. Richard Weaver in the book, The Closing of the American Mind, says this: "Nothing good can come if the will is wrong. To give evidence to him who loves not the truth is only to give him more plentiful material for more misinterpretation." Do you know what he's saying? There are some people, it doesn't matter what you say, you are not going to change their minds. I know you have no one like that in your family. But some people love to argue and debate for the sake of arguing and to debate. They're not after truth. Stay away from those type people. I'm telling you, some people just love to sit in a corner and just ask questions, never giving any defense for any answers. They thrive on argumentation and debating. They're not after truth. Run away. Now, there are other people, and I know a lot of them are right here at our church, and I'm glad they're here, that they're not argumentative. They're explorers, and they really do want to cross over into faith in Christ. But there are some barriers that they feel they have to cross before that can happen, and nobody's helping them cross it. Well, at CCV, I do not want to be a wall builder. I want to be a bridge builder. So when people ask difficult questions, even ones that put us on the back foot or seemingly, I don't want us to look like we're a deer caught in headlights or to say, "You can't ask those questions, get away from our church." Well, that's just crazy stuff. I want them to have the freedom to ask any question they want and to make any statement and enter into dialogue if they're honestly seeking truth. And so this new series that I'm doing called Doubt is addressing 6 of those walls that through emails and letters and conversations in our church are preventing a great percentage who come every week from really crossing over and saying, "All right, Pastor Jeff, I would like to become a Christian." Now let me tell you, today's message is going to give you a headache, a royal pain in the head. But I'm asking you that as I go through it, and you're saying, "Man, this is not what I want," I'm asking you to take the Christian mature approach. Then pray. Sit there and pray for the 10 or 12% of people in our congregation that until somebody up front like this deals with this issue, they just can't cross over. And I have a heart and passion for them. And I want you to have a heart and passion as well. But I also do it because I want you to be able to give a reason for the hope that is within you, in season and out of season. And stop looking like you're shocked when people ask you some of the more difficult questions concerning our faith. So here we go with doubt number 1. Perhaps the largest doubt in some people's lives, that barrier that prevents them from crossing over, is the barrier of science. And here's how it goes. They'll say, "Pastor Jeff, Science explains everything now, so we don't need God anymore. And since Christianity is based upon a personal God who has reached down to man, well, if there's no God, there's no Christianity. And they will sum it like this: Pastor Jeff, science disproves Christianity. Now, right off the bat, I want to tell you, if you're in that category, I'm not mad at you. I've been there. And so I have great affinity for you, but I want you to hear me out. The first thing you got to do, and the same thing I had to do on my journey, was ask this question: whose science are you talking about? Because there have been two famous surveys done between 1916 and 1997. That's 80 years difference, and yet they came up with the same conclusion. The most popular and respected scientists in their fields were interviewed and asked one simple question: do you believe in a God who actively communicates with humanity, at least through prayer? Now notice this is not a generic question. It's not like, do you believe in some big blob of energy? This is, do you believe in a personal God to whom you pray? 40% of the scientists, now we're not talking about Christians here, 40% of well-respected professional scientists in their field said yes. 40% said no, and 20% said we haven't made up our mind yet. This shocked the New York Times to such a degree that they led an article in the newspaper with this title: 40% of scientists believe in God to whom they pray. In 1997, they repeated the survey and learned that in the last 80 years, none of the numbers had changed. Still today. And if you want to read about these findings, you can do so in Nature magazine, April 3rd, 1997. And the headline reads, "Scientists are still keeping the faith." And they discovered that even among the 40% of those scientists who said they did not believe in God, the reason they did not believe in God had little to do with science and more to do with pain and disappointment and tragedy in their lives. The bottom line, those of you who fall into the category of, Pastor Jeff, I just can't cross over because of science, I just want you to know I've been on this journey, and you need to know that a significant number of scientists, well respected in their fields, do not believe for a moment that science disproves God. They believe that God is alive and well, and if God is alive and well, then the Christianity or the Christian faith as a worldview needs seriously considered, or needs serious consideration. It's been a long week. Now, let me tell you why that surprises us. And let me tell you, you're going to get a headache, but that's okay. I spent 3 days reading material from everything from physicists to nuclear scientists, so if my head hurts, yours does too. The reason that surprises us is because the media loves conflict. And they don't present these type of scientists to you. You'll never see a John Polkinghorne or a John Lennox or a Francis Collins interviewed on CNN. When's the last time you saw the media interview a believer in God who wanted to talk about his pursuit and passion of science? When's the last time you saw a well-respected scientist interviewed and want to talk about his faith in God? Doesn't happen. Instead, the only thing you ever hear about in American media and even British media are people like Richard Dawkins, author of The God Delusion, or Sam Harris, talking about moral law. And Dawkins in The God Delusion implies that all atheistic scientists would agree with him that no rational scientific mind could ever believe in God. And I'm telling you, that is an outright lie. Stephen Jay Gould, Harvard University professor, scientist, evolutionist, and atheist, said this: either half my colleagues are enormously stupid, or else the science of Darwinism is fully compatible with conventional religious beliefs and equally compatible with atheism. Now, you know what he's saying? He's saying, I have great difficulty in coming to terms with the fact that half my colleagues at Harvard are believers in God. And they also believe in evolution. Isn't that interesting? That the two somehow could possibly be compatible. The point is, if you're a scientist, I want you to know, and if you're struggling, I want you to hear me. You need to understand that you do not have to choose between science and faith. That modern science indeed was born out of a belief in God and the desire to study His handiworks. Do you read, again, what I read? For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead. The Apostle Paul says, as you look around and see creation, the rational mind says, there must be a God, and more scientists than not agree with that affirmation. Now, over a number of years in ministry, the real issue involves Genesis 1 and 2. Or I will have a friend say this to me, Pastor Jeff, the Bible says that God created the heavens and the earth, but evolution has shown that the Big Bang did it, so we don't need God. Now, there are some problems with the statement. Does the Big Bang really negate God? Because there are many scientists who believe that the Big Bang is simply what scientists call the explosion that occurred when God brought the world into existence. Pow! Francis Sellers Collins, born April 14, 1950, and I want to recall your attention, scientists, to the fact that I am not quoting theologians here. I am quoting well-respected scientists in their fields. He's an American physician geneticist. He was noted for the discoveries of disease genes, for his leadership in the Human Genome Project, or the HGP, and described he is, as by the Endocrine Society, as the most accomplished scientist of our time. So I'm just trying to point out he's not intellectually challenged. And here is what he says. We have this very solid conclusion that the universe had an origin, the Big Bang. 15 billion years ago, the universe began with an unimaginably bright flash of energy from an infinitesimally small point. That implies that before that, there was nothing. I can't imagine how nature, in this case the universe, could have created itself. And he goes on to say that the very fact that the universe had a beginning implies that someone was able to begin it. And it seems to me that had to be outside of nature. So what's this brilliant scientist saying? That the only explanation for our universe is that a non-material outside agent or entity launched this universe into being. We call him God. Stephen Hawking, in his younger days, who was once described as the smartest man to have ever lived, says this: the odds against a universe like ours emerging out of something like the Big Bang are enormous. I think there are clearly religious implications, that there would be a designer behind the design. Something does not come from nothing. This world was orchestrated. Now, here's my only point. And again, I realize I can see it already in some of your eyes. You've already got a headache. You're glossing over and thinking about lunch today. I'm asking you again, if you have that temptation, I'm telling you there are about 12% of the people in this room that are right now on the edge of their seat thinking, yeah, finally some pastor's going to deal with this. Pray for them. Be unselfish. To my scientific friends who see it as a barrier, I want you to know that many scientists believe that the Big Bang is simply a secular description of the biblical verse, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and when he did it with a very big, big bang. So much so that there are many scientists who firmly believe that the Big Bang actually proves the existence of God. Okay, let me take a breath. Now this is going to hurt. John Polkinghorne, the professor of quantum theory or physics at the University of Cambridge for all those years, he was an atheist. And he's the one, I believe that, no, that was Frederick Hoyle, so hold on a minute. Polkinghorne says that if you think about the expansion and contraction of the universe in the early picoseconds. Now, remember what a picosecond is. A picosecond is the time it takes something traveling the speed of light to cross a hair's breadth. That's pretty fast. And he says that the relationship between the expansion and the contraction forces in the early picoseconds of the universe is so precise, it's unfathomable. In other words, if the universe expands or contracts too quickly or too slowly, then all you would have is black holes. You wouldn't have stars and planets and the things we have now. To have life, organic life on the planet that exists right here and right now, science tells us that the precision was uncanny, that somebody had to be guiding it. It's like taking a bow and arrow and shooting it across the galaxy 20 billion light years away and hitting the bullseye every time. That kind of precision. Someone was guiding the process. Francis Collins throws his weight around and says, when you look from the perspective of a scientist at the universe, it looks as if it knew we were coming. There are 15 constants, the gravitational constant, various constants about the strong and weak nuclear force that have precise values. And if any one of those constants was off even by 1 part in a million, in some cases, by 1 part in a million, the universe could not have actually come to a point where we see it. Matter would have not been able to coalesce. There would not have been galaxies or stars or planets or people. What's your point? Creation occurred with precision to be a perfect match for you and me. And there are many scientists that say, there's no way you're going to convince us that it's by accident. All right, let's give you some Bayer aspirin for the headache. If you're a simple mind like me, this is all good and well, but it really doesn't do much for you. Now, my area is in philosophy, so science is a struggle for me too. As a matter of fact, how many times have you gone to Google something and you read it and you were no smarter than you were when you started reading? Because you just, what? But my theory is that if it's that explainable and it's that true, everyone ought to be able to explain it to a degree or to understand it. But I still work in this whole area of you still have to ask the question of where everything began, even before the fine-tuning of the universe. I was in a New Zealand radio interview, and we were talking about all these topics, and a lady called in, and she was livid with rage, just angry, and she said, Pastor Jeff, this is my problem with all you pastors right here. We don't need God because we have evolution. We don't need God because we have evolution. She kept saying it, and finally, after about 15 minutes, I was just tired. And I said, would you please explain to me what you mean when you say we don't need God, we have evolution? She goes, well, we all know where life came from. It came from this prebiotic pool, this primordial pool of some nature where proteins just flew in off the wind. 289 proteins in the precise order to create for us the building blocks of life, amino acids, from which all life would ultimately spring. So Jeff, we don't need God, we have this prebiotic pool. She says, I know the odds are astronomical, but nevertheless, given billions of times and random processes, these proteins flew in the precise order to make amino acids, and now we have life. And I said, can I ask you just one question? She said, what? I said, from where did the primordial pool come? And who made the proteins that flew into this prebiotic pool? There was silence on the other end of the line. And finally she said, oh, I don't know. And I said, don't you think it's a pretty important question? Now, here's my point. Science is great at explaining the universe. It's not so good at explaining first cause. And I realize for those 10 or 12% who are in the audience, I recognize that for every answer I give you, science will have an alternative answer. I'm under no illusion there. And here's what I had to do in my life. And here's what I'm challenging you to do in yours. Stop looking for irrefutable proof of the existence of God. You can't prove anything 100%. Start looking for clues. And when you start looking for the clues of what would be evident if God did exist, that will take you on an entirely different journey. Because science may say that it believes a lot, but most of what you read about in science is claimed hypothesis and theory. Now, sure, there are some facts we know. There are some in the natural universe, things that we know are constant, but even then you have to ask why the universe is sustained with those constants. Go back again to Romans 1:19 that says, because what may be known about God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead. And when you think about the fact that the sun is 330,000 times larger than planet Earth, and the sun is only one star in our galaxy, there's 100 billion other stars, and there's billions of other galaxies, how much do we really know? We may understand 2 ounces of the universe, but there's so much more not in the purview of science. So here's what I want to do. I want to give you 4 clues quickly, and then it's over. It's going to be painful, but 4 clues that I think we all should look for to say, wow, God exists. And strangely enough, 2 of those clues come from science. And here's the first one, the Big Bang. 40, 50 years ago, if I would have said to someone, God is eternal, they would have said to me, well, you say God is eternal, I say the universe is eternal, so since the universe is eternal, we don't need God. The problem is science came along and said the universe is not eternal. It had a beginning point. It began with an explosion and has been expanding ever since. Let me take you back to those scientific quotes. Francis Collins says, 15 billion years ago, the universe began with an unimaginably bright flash of energy from an infinitesimally small point. And the very fact that the universe had a beginning implies that someone was able to begin it. Stephen Hawking, again, in another quote says, almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. And he also says the odds against a universe like ours emerging out of something like the Big Bang are enormous, I think there are clearly religious implications. The question I ask all of you scientists is a simple one. Not all of you scientists, but those of you who think science is a barrier to faith. I ask you to consider, sure, let's say there are possibilities, but what are the probabilities? Science functions on that kind of data. And what is the best answer to how the universe began? And the best answer is a first cause agent. That Genesis 1:1 quite possibly is true, then in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. There is a second clue. And those who delve in these kind of activities refer to this clue as the cosmic welcome mat. And again, it is science that tells us that the universe appears to be specifically made for us to live here. It's like this universe is created with us specifically in mind that we're going to live here. Again, Francis Collins says, when you look at it from the perspective of a scientist at the universe, it looks as if it knew we were coming. And listen, now this is the little difficult part, and then all the hard part's over. William Lane Craig comes in at this point. And I want you to look at what he says. You college and university students, I know you thought on the weekend you got out of class. I realize that. Stay with me. William Lane Craig says, science has been stunned by the discoveries over the last 30 to 40 years that the initial conditions of the universe were fine-tuned for the existence of intelligent life with a complexity and delicacy that literally defies human comprehension. In other words, the science is telling us now, oh my goodness, the more we learn about the universe, the more we realize somebody put this place together. Not only that, somebody is still sustaining it. Now, I know everybody's got a headache by now, so this is when I bring Mr. Potato Head in. Because one of these days I'm going to write a book called Mr. Potato Head Theology. You'd read it, wouldn't you? I mean, it's a pretty good idea. I'm serious about that. I'm putting it together right now. Look at Mr. Potato Head. Now, if science is a barrier to faith, I want you to know that this illustration is not for you. Because you're going to think this is too simplistic, and I would agree. This is to bring everyone else along so that I can make my next point, okay? Mr. Potato Head, think about him for a moment. He doesn't have a brain. And so, even so, there are things that we would say would be out of the ordinary. And because he's kind of like in a real way, a description of us. I mean, some of us actually look like Mr. Potato Head. But we have the arms and the ears. But if you look at Mr. Potato Head, it just wouldn't seem right if the feet were going back. That just wouldn't work really well, would it? And if the ears were faced this way, you'd think there's something wrong with Mr. Potato Head. Well, and even in us, what if one leg was longer than the other? It'd be hard to walk, wouldn't it? And what if our eyes were in the back of our heads and our feet make us go forward? That just wouldn't seem right, would it? Although I would confess my wife seems to have eyes in the back of her head, but that's another issue completely. The point is, Mr. Potato Head theology kind of shows us there's an expectation that God put us together, and the way he put us together makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Now, the reason that's simplistic is you've got to multiply that by infinity when it comes to the universe. God not only put the sun, the moon, the stars, and everything in the precise order and precise position to allow life to function and be sustained on the planet, but even the way they relate to each other sustains the universe. Now, for a scientific explanation of this, British astronomer, Sir Martin Rees gives us this, and I'm going to read this, and I want you to read it with me, not together, just listen. The sun, he says, burns by fusing hydrogen and higher elements together. When the two hydrogen atoms fuse at 0.7% of the mass of the hydrogen is converted into energy. If the amount of matter converted were slightly smaller, we're talking about 0.6% instead of 0.7%, a proton could not bond to a neutron, and the universe would consist only of hydrogen. With no heavy elements, there would be no rocky planets and no life. If the amount of matter converted were slightly larger at 0.8%, fusion would happen so readily and rapidly that no hydrogen would have survived from the Big Bang. Again, there would have been no solar systems and no life. The number must lie exactly between 0.6% and 0.8%. And that's just the sun. We don't have time to talk about dark energy. We don't have time to talk more about the expansion and contraction of the universe. So many things in our universe put together precisely, sustaining life, and here we are, which is why Sir Frederick Hoyle, now he's the guy I mentioned earlier, the astronomer, who's a well-known atheist for many years, who actually is the one responsible for coining the phrase, the Big Bang, one day walked up and turned in his atheistic card and said, I can no longer be an atheist. It's impossible because the odds of this place happening, being fine-tuned and sustaining by accident are just too astronomical to believe for a moment. And then he goes on to say that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics, as well as with chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to be so overwhelming to put this conclusion almost beyond question. And then he's the one famous for saying, asking me to believe that all this here is by accident, and this fine-tuning together is all by chance, is like asking me to believe that a tornado sweeps through a junkyard and assembles a fully functioning 747. Now, does that mean the atheists don't have a response to fine-tuning and precision? They actually do. Now, this is where we all need to just kind of come in here for a second, even if it's hard. Richard Dawkins says, well, I have my own explanation for the precision and fine-tuning of the universe, and he says it's multi or parallel universes. You sci-fi guys will love that idea. But let me explain it for dummies, which is me. What is parallel or multi-universes? There is the scientific theory, and I like to call it more of a hope, that there are parallel universes all around us functioning, operating right now that we can't see, touch, feel, or even know is there. But they are there, nevertheless, they will say. And these parallel universes are firing one after the next, after the next, after the next, so they're continually being or coming into existence. And Dawkins says, given the odds, over billions and billions of years and eons of time, sooner or later, you're going to fire a universe that is capable of sustaining life. He says, there may be. Now that's the point. When you read stuff on Google and Wikipedia, look for those two words, may be. There may be millions of universes existing over enormous amounts of time and space. It is inevitable that given enough time, one would appear that could sustain life. Now here's the problem with the parallel universe. Is it possible? Yes, it is. Scientifically speaking, zillions of things are possible. Is it probable? No. Can it be tested? Can you step into one of these parallel universes? Can you feel its effects? No. It's like me telling you, I got a pink elephant around the corner that's sipping iced tea. And I'm going to take you and show you that pink elephant. The problem is you have to understand, as soon as he senses we're coming, he disappears. What is the problem with that? It's untestable. I can't test it. So I can't prove you wrong. I can't. That's why Alvin Plantinga uses this classic illustration. He says, imagine these guys playing poker. And this one guy deals himself, the dealer, deals himself in a hand of poker, 20 straight hands of 4 aces. What's going to happen? Well, his playing partner is going to pull their 6-shooters. And then you're going to know what the big bang is really all about. Now, suppose that when they did, he says this, guys, I know it looks suspicious, but what if there's an infinite succession of universes so that for any possible distribution of poker hands, there is one universe in which this possibility is realized. We just happen to find ourselves in one where I always deal myself 4 aces without cheating. What are they going to do? Shoot him. Why? Though you could not prove he was cheating, it would be unreasonable to assume that he wasn't. For those of you who see faith as a barrier, science a barrier to faith, distinguish between irrefutable proof and clues, and distinguish between probability and possibility. Third clue. Now, if there's one clue that I think is the clincher, it's this one. My personal opinion is this is irrefutable, but I'm going to leave it in the category. It's objective moral law. Go back to what Paul said in Romans 1, because what may be known of God is manifest where? Because what may be known of God, I know it's going to come up here, there it is manifest where? In us. Folks, ladies and gentlemen, you all have to ask this one serious question, and it's this. Why is it that you have the intrinsic innate ability to distinguish between right and wrong? Why? The Bible says God has placed eternity in our hearts, and He would write His law on our hearts. You don't have to be a Christian to know the difference between right and wrong. And do you know why? Because you've been created in the image of God. It is innate and intrinsic. Now, some of you are a little suspicious about that, but let me remind you, anytime you categorically state that something is wrong, you are assuming an absolute category of good and evil. You are assuming objective moral law. In philosophy, we say it like this. If objective moral laws exist, God exists. Since objective moral laws do exist, God exists. What is an objective moral law? An objective moral law is a law that exists whether you feel it's right or not. It is above feeling and emotion. It is objectively wrong. So if somebody comes along and says, I don't think rape is wrong, what are you going to say to them? You're wrong, pal, rape is wrong. Why are you going to say that? Because you believe in objective moral laws. Why did we tell Hitler and the Third Reich that slaughtering 6 million innocent Jews was wrong? Because Hitler might have said to you, you think it's wrong, I think it's right. I was just protecting my people from the corrosion of the Jewish people. That wouldn't fly in court, would it? You know why? Because you believe in objective moral laws. When those planes flew into the Twin Towers, if somebody came along and said, I think that was right, you would say, that was wrong and evil. Why? Because you believe in objective moral laws. You believe that there are laws of right and wrong that are intrinsic and innate in every individual's life. And if that changes somehow and gets corrupted, it's not because you weren't innately born, it's because society corrupts you, i.e. Hitler. Anytime you stand on the outside and say what you did was wrong, you assume objective moral law, and you can only do that if there's God. Why? We've been over this. You going to make me do this again? Once you assume evil, you assume good. Once you assume evil and good, you assume a moral law that governs the categories of good and evil. And once you assume a moral law, that moral law has to be absolute for those categories to maintain integrity. And the only way you can have an absolute moral law is to have God. And every time somebody challenges me on that and says that the modern or the popular public can create objective moral law, I say, you still got one problem. Every time we ask the question of evil, we do so in light of assuming that life is sacred and needs to be preserved. Did you see what happened to that motorcycle driver who was under the car, and those guys all lifted that car off of him, save his life? And do you know why they did that? Because they believe that life is sacred. And you can only believe life is sacred and in the sanctity of life if there's a creator. Because if we're here by time plus matter plus chance, life is not sacred. You're just a group of chemicals, and one day you're going to go back into the dirt. 4, the last one, the knowledge of God in us. It's almost over, and I'm the last thing. You've done well. I'm proud of you. I was worried about 10 o'clock. I just got to tell you. I was worried, okay? Because I know how you are. Most of you, a lot of you in the room are already believers, aren't you? And if I could have come out here today and said, science proves faith in God, you would have gone, yeah, thanks for coming. But I'm doing this for the 10% in the room that struggle, and I want you to have a heart for them too. It's almost over. The knowledge of God in us. The latest statistics tell us that somewhere between 94.7 and 98.4% of the world believe in God. Interesting, isn't it? Somewhere in the 90%. For Christians, we say, well, of course they do. The Bible says God has placed eternity in the hearts of man, Ecclesiastes 3:11. So it makes sense to us that people would come into the world with the knowledge of God. Atheistic evolutionists know this is a problem, and they wonder why children grow up with the assumption of God. Some research has been done in countries that lean more toward atheism, which are few and far between, and they've learned that even in those countries, children come into the world believing in God. It's only when they're taught by their parents that there is no God that they start to change their belief. Now, New York Times Magazine had an article entitled, How Evolution Explains Faith in God. And evolution, atheistic evolutionary position is that we know that the idea of an infallible God is comfortable and familiar, something children readily accept. Okay, I got to move quickly. Here's how I want to end. I want to answer this question, but I want to show you a photo just in a second. When I went back to see my dad and do my dad's funeral, I went through the treasure chest that I told you about and found some goodies. I found a picture of me when I was 18 years and 2 months old. Now, when I saw it, it just about, wow, it'd been years since I'd seen it. The reason I took it is because my son Delaney thinks he looks nothing like me. And all his friends say that he looks nothing like me. And I don't know if that's made him happy or depressed him. But I found this picture. And if you don't know Delaney, I'm sorry, it's not going to pack the powerful punch. But if you do know, and I probably think there's enough in here to know that this is going to be an interesting. This picture I'm about to show you is a picture taken at the precise age that my son is right now, and this is what I look like at 18 years and 2 months. Isn't that, I mean, for those of you who know Delaney, it's scary, isn't it? One of Delaney's friends wrote on Facebook this, "What, Delaney? You mean to tell me that you're going to be as handsome and good looking as your dad when you get older?" So I started reading this one. Man, that you're going to have handsome and sexy features like your dad. I thought, man, who is this? I love this. I took that off Facebook and I read it to my entire staff. Well, just the management team. And as I'm reading, I said, look at what this girl said. And then my PA said, Jeff, that's not actually a girl. That's a guy. There's one of the guys that Lanny knows trying to help me feel better about myself in old age. All right, here's the point of that. The new atheists say that the reason so many people believe in God is because of a thing called the God gene. There's a gene in us that's the God gene. They say that if God makes sense to us, it's not because he's really there, it's because that belief helps us survive, and so we're hardwired for it. Do you hear what they're saying? Now, you thinkers, forget about science, you philosophers or deep thinkers, you follow me here. Well, actually, all of you. I've got to be careful there, but just wait here. Do you realize what they're saying? They're saying that somewhere in our past, in the evolutionary cycle, that our ancestors found out that belief in God actually helped them to survive. So they started believing in God. Or maybe they believed in God first, and we just know by natural selection that belief in God keeps you alive and allows the human race to continue to prosper. And so those who believe in atheistic evolution, that there is no God, say that's why we believe in God, is because we're just hardwired to, because our ancestors did, because it helped them survive. Now, does anybody see a fundamental problem with this? The first is this. Okay, so you're telling me that the atheists are the weak in our world, so we don't need to worry about the atheists. They'll soon die out. Got it? If only the strong survive? But there's another fundamental problem because they go too far. They say we really can't trust the reason and logic to tell us the truth about reality. We're just hardwired for certain beliefs, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they represent reality. Anybody see a problem here? Because if we can't trust our belief-forming faculties to tell us the truth about God, can we trust our belief-forming faculties to tell us the truth about anything, even evolution? See, this is the problem. You go too far. And those of you who think science is a barrier to faith, I simply ask you those 4 questions. You have to ask yourself, why is there something instead of nothing? Why is this planet perfectly situated against all odds to sustain life, a highly sophisticated fine-tuning? Why do we live as if objective moral values exist? And why do we come into this world with eternity in our hearts? Again, are there other options? Yes. Are there other possibilities? Yes. But what are the probabilities? Where does the evidence point? And I like what Jared Sayers says, one of the young guys at our church on his Facebook account. He said, personally, I don't think there's intelligent life on other planets. Why should other planets be any different from this one? But it is different, isn't it? And we use our faculties, our reasoning, and we are compelled to look and say, my goodness, God exists. Now, throughout this entire series, I've said this. God gives you just enough information to compel you toward him, but leaves just enough out so that faith in God can never be purely rational. But there's still something missing in that statement. Why? Why does he do it like that? And here's how I want to end the sermon. No more science. Romance. That's why he does it. Show you a picture that I found of my wife when I met her. This is what my wife looked like when I met her. This is what she looked like a few years later. Now, right I show you that? I've been married to this beautiful woman for 25 years, and I still don't know her. Now, I know a lot more about her today than I did then. But my entire life has been the pursuit of this woman. Right, guys? You never stop pursuing your wife. Now, if you do, you get in trouble. But if you fall in love and the marriage is what it's supposed to be, you pursue your wife your entire life. And you know what she does? She lets you catch her for a while, and then she withdraws a little bit and see if you'll chase her. And she lets you catch her for a while, and she withdraws a little bit more. That's called romance. She wants to know if you love her and if you will seek her. Guess what? God does the same. That's why we're told all through the Bible that we are the bride of Christ, that we are the lover of God. And all of your life, folks, has been God's fine-tuning to compel you into relationship with him. Your disasters, your disappointments, sometimes he withdraws, sometimes he embraces, and all of that is to get you to keep moving. Romance. that you would love God and He would love you. And it all culminates in Revelation 21 when the Bible says, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared like a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and He will dwell with them. They will be His people, and God Himself will be their God, and He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There'll be no more mourning or crying or pain. Romance. God gives you just enough to compel, but stands back just enough for you to keep pursuing. And what I know about God today is light years ahead of what I knew when I first became a believer, because I had choices all through my life, at disaster, in times of joy, in times of frustration, to keep pursuing Him or to reject Him. And because I have chosen to keep pursuing, I keep learning more about God all the time, so that I can lose my dad and bury him a week ago and actually increase my love for God. Romance. That's God. Father, thank you for this morning, for your love. Thank you for the fine-tuning of a universe and the fine-tuning of our lives. And I would pray that although it's been heavy this morning, that we would leave fired up again in the wonder and beauty of your creation, and how majestic indeed is your name in all the earth. And I would pray now, if there are any in the room, that science has been a barrier for a long, long time, that this morning they would be able to cross over, and their lives would be changed, and their eyes would be open to your love and your truth as they consider the probabilities and the clues that lead us to God. In His name I pray. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.